Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of the Numbers Podcast. We finally got through our third election, and little did we know we would have a fourth one in store. But Philippe, how are you feeling after what's been a pretty busy month?
Well, it's been a busy month, but how are you feeling, Eric? You stayed up late on Monday night, right? I mean, I watched you on TV. You did very well, by the way, on the CBC covering the Saskatchewan election. It was always fun to go back to you. It was a light atmosphere, I must say, at the CBC, wasn't it? It was lighter than what we're used to, I think, with federal or bigger provinces. So yeah. So how are you this morning?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Yeah, maybe it was a bit lighter. I think the crew there is a little bit more familiar with each other than maybe some other places, and
It was
so they
good.
were having a bit more fun.
Yeah.
And I did it from Ottawa, so I think we went off the air by my time. It was maybe 2 or 2:30 in the morning.
Wow.
Which isn't as much fun as it would have been had I been in Regina. But I enjoyed the show. It was fun to do it. I always love doing those shows, and it was a heck of a night for the kind of stuff that I usually do in election nights, where it's about kind of explaining what's trying to happen. So long, it took so long for Election Saskatchewan to count the ballots in the cities
Yeah.
that for the longest time we had like a 26-5
Yeah.
on the board, and it looked like, well, it looks like the Sask party's going to do really well here. They're going to like run away with it. But I had to keep explaining that we got to wait for all these ridings to come. And there was various points in the night where, when you were mapping it out,
Yeah.
you still saw the path for the NDP, which is also why it took so long to make that call. Is that while it seemed like the Sask party never really was in danger, there was a couple moments where the number of ridings that were really close,
Yeah.
and if you added them to the NDP, they were getting up to 28, 29, maybe sometimes 30. So it was a really interesting night. So I think that's maybe where we should start, eh?
Yes,
Start in
absolutely.
Saskatchewan?
Well, we have to start. I mean, we have to start with it. And I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about the results first or the polls. We have to talk about the polls.
Yeah.
Like it's really. I mean, if I may start, it's really too bad what happened to pollsters in Saskatchewan, because they were having, as a general rule, they were having such a great month. And such a great stretch too. We hadn't seen a collective polling miss, since the previous Saskatchewan election. And so it had been 4 years at least since this miss. But wow, what a catastrophe for polls in Saskatchewan. And in 2020. When you look at the polls, there were not that many polls, but all the polls except the Angus Street Institute had the NDP between 5 and 8 points too high. And now it was 8 to 8 points too high. It was worse than 2020. So looking forward to see their explanation, to see what happened. But what did you see in those numbers?
Yeah, the projected gap was anywhere from 12 to 15 points for the NDP. The last time the polls underestimated the Sask party's lead by about 9 to 11 points. Here they overestimated the NDP's lead by 15 points. It was not a very good performance. Now, as we're chatting, today is the day where they're doing the second preliminary count, so they're going to count about 20,000 ballots today. It's not going to change, could change a few ridings, so we'll talk about that actually a little further on. But it will probably bump the NDP up, and then they're going to have another count on November 9th, which will probably bump them up again. So maybe by the time that we're finished, the NDP is going to end up at like 40 to 41%, just based on how well they usually do on the mail-in ballots. And maybe the Sask party will drop down to 52 or 51. So it won't be as bad as as what we're looking now, but it'll still be pretty poor, because the polls had the NDP at 49 to 50%.
Yeah.
They ended up with, like I said, 40 to 41. So that's a pretty big miss. The miss won't be as bad for the Sask party, because they had them somewhere usually around 45 to 46, and they'll end up at 51 or so. But you're going to need to go through the numbers, the regional numbers, to see if it was an outside of the city's issue, if it was across the province. But thank goodness for the NDP's vote efficiency, because it could have looked a lot worse, right? It could have looked like the polls not only missed, but that it wasn't that close of an election because it ended up being a close election, right? So we got 35
Yeah.
seats for the Sask party, 26 for the NDP. There's some counting of the mail ballots going to happen. I'm pretty confident. I think that the NDP will probably flip at least one. So maybe we'll end up at 34-27. But what was your takeaway from the overall results, not just the polls?
Well, I mean, I think the 27th seat for the NDP that you're referring to is Willow Grove, Saskatoon Willow Grove. Is that right?
Or Westview?
Westview. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, Westview. So that's okay. So that less fewer than 100 votes separating the two. It could flip, but what I mean, my observation from the numbers is that the NDP did exactly what it had to do: sweep Regina, almost sweep Saskatoon, but it's those not as much rural but smaller cities, Prince Albert and Moose Jaw. I mean, only one of those 4 seats was close. The others weren't. So we looked at the swing in the polling, and figured, well, I mean, they have to do better in Moose Jaw and Prince Albert, and they did better, but it wasn't even close. And so if you look at the map, if I told you prior to the election that the NDP is going to get shut out in those 4 seats in Prince Albert and Moose Jaw, you'd be like, okay, there's no path. There is no path. They have to do better in there. So I guess this is the campaign for 2028 can start now for the NDP. The Sask party also did what it had to do, sweep those rural regions. They kept most of the projected vote, right? They lost 10 points compared to 4 years ago, but they still won. 10 points was not enough, basically. Mm-hmm. And so our projections were okay, but that's because of the stark rural and urban divide. Even if you gave me the right numbers and I inputted my projection, instead of having 29 or 20 or 30 seats, it would have been 25 or 26, would not have changed much in the outcome. So that's my big take. But really, I mean, it's funny that yesterday I received messages, emails, texts from pollsters, several of them, including some that did not field in Saskatchewan. And who were like, well, you see what happens when we don't vote, when people can't heard of us, right? I think maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but you really can see that a polling miss affects those business very much. And so before knocking them down, I will try to take the time to analyze the numbers and see what happened, because the pollsters, again, we're having a great month, but Saskatchewan really shattered that.
Yeah, I'm not going to give credit for pollsters who weren't in the field because I don't know what their numbers were. Maybe they would have been just as off as anybody else. And the pollsters that were in Saskatchewan were some of the same ones that were in New Brunswick and British Columbia. And it is curious that, again, the same thing that happened in 2020 happened again in 2024. Again, I think it is largely going to be in the rural areas when we look at it, because the polls had the NDP and the Saskatchewan party more or less correct in Regina and Saskatoon. That the NDP was going to be somewhere around 60% and the Sask party was going to be somewhere between 35-40%. But I think it'll probably end up being in the outside of those two cities. And as you mentioned, in Prince Albert and Moose Jaw. It is kind of funny how the path for the NDP that we highlighted, which seems so implausible, that they had to win some of those other seats like White City, Capel, or Blairsville, Martinsville, Blairsmore. Yeah. But in the end, they swept Regina. They're probably going to win 13 of 14 in Saskatoon, maybe even 14 of 14 if they flip Willow Grove with the mail-in. They had the 2 in the north, and then you look at what would have been the next ridings, the 2 in Prince Albert and the 2 in Moose Jaw. Yeah. It was the perfect that they could only win the northern ridings, which have lots of Indigenous voters, which have historically supported the NDP, the urban centers, and then the small cities. But the small cities, they just couldn't break through. And for the Sask party, their caucus will have 1, maybe 2, maybe 0 MLAs from the 2 biggest cities in the province. That is not a great place to be as a government either. I mean, it's better to be in government than in opposition. But
Yeah.
I mean, your minister, you're one person from Saskatoon. If that's it, going to be the minister for everything urban. It's just going to be. It's not. It's just the urban rural divide is starkest in Saskatchewan than perhaps anywhere else. The UCP won more seats in Calgary.
Yeah.
The Manitoba PCs have at least a handful of seats in Winnipeg, and the NDP in Manitoba is able to win seats outside of Winnipeg. But in Saskatchewan, it's Regina, Saskatoon, Orange. The fields are green. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we look at the four western provinces. They, as you mentioned, they have a similar pattern, right? The urban-rural divide is far more important than the gender divide, than the generational divide. I mean, how many seats did the Conservatives win in the BC Conservatives won in Vancouver? Was it only one? Was it Kilchena,
in Vancouver
right?
proper? Yeah, there's just the one, Kilchena.
So I know it's more varied than that, right? But very, very interesting to follow. And again, this will be a very interesting election in 28. The only problem is I can already tell you that some pollsters have told me I'm not fielding in Saskatchewan in 28. Like, why would I do that if it doesn't work? And while I shake my head a little bit at this, just a few months ago I retracted my seat by seat projections for Newfoundland. And why did I do that? Because if it doesn't work, I don't want to give out false information. I don't want to just have vibes in there. I want to have something that's scientific and that's logical. But if they can't nail down, if they can't reach those rural voters and have an accurate picture of the landscape, why would they risk their reputation to do that? So it's a polling miss, but for me, when everybody misses, it's different than when some pollsters miss and some pollsters nail it, right? There's something systemic in there. But anyway, so yeah, tough night for the pollsters in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, the ones who were in the field earlier in the campaign did better, but it could just be because they were capturing a different moment in time. It's hard to know for certain. It would have been nice to see, for example, the Janet Brown poll that was done in about the midpoint did suggest that maybe the NDP was going to struggle more in the rural areas than we saw at other polls at the time. Would have been great to have that poll done in the last week just so that we can compare it to the other ones. But woulda, coulda, shoulda. We should maybe get our members to pool resources so we can start commissioning some high-quality polls in provinces that are tough.
One little thing here.
Bad idea.
What narrative research did in New Brunswick?
Yes.
This is what should be done in Saskatchewan next time. It has to be commissioned. I'm sure it's hard. But had we had a poll of Moose Jaw and one of Prince Albert, like 400 respondents, nothing big, we would have seen right away, okay, the NDP has no path. The NDP, there's no way they reach 31. It's impossible. But we didn't, and so we couldn't. One more thing, and I don't like to diss anybody, but I have to say something about inside tricks and the local posters here. I mean...
Oh, no.
Well, we have to, right? If we analyze the polls, we have to be fair. They not only did they have the NDP ahead, but they had the NDP ahead or tied with the Sask party for a year and a half. Right? When you look at the list of polls and you see inside tricks, they had a close race since 2023. And they had the NDP 5 points ahead, and the NDP lost by, double digits for now, but we'll see what the final count is. That means, for me, that none of their polls was correct. It was never close. They better fix their methodology because something went really wrong. At least, some of the pollsters, like Main Street, like ResearchCo and the others, saw a Sask party lead, then that tightened, and finally it flipped in the end. But Insitrix had the NDP ahead or tied all the way through. And so those numbers tell me that they were wrong all along. They misled us all along. So, fix your online symbol because it's clearly it's not working.
Well, it's proven to be a difficult place to poll. We've seen that also in federal campaigns, where the Conservatives tend to do a lot better in Saskatchewan than we might have expected. So I think there is something that is a bit difficult in Saskatchewan. So maybe some of those panels need to try to recruit more people outside of the two cities. I'm not sure what the issue is, but hopefully some people will work to get it fixed over the next 4 years, and people won't just opt out. And if need be, hopefully, Citrix was working with CTV. I'm not sure what the relationship was there, but thinking what are the other newspapers that could commission polls in Saskatchewan? It's the two Post Media ones, and last I checked, Post Media does not have money to spend on much. So that's unfortunate. We'll see how it goes. Maybe we just spend some last few minutes on what the results might mean. I mean, if you're Pierre Poilievre looking at the results, if you're Jagmeet Singh, if you're Justin Trudeau, were there any lessons out of the Saskatchewan election for those leaders?
I'm not too sure. I mean, again, we have to be careful not to overthink those provincial-federal relationships. Clearly, there are provincial NDP, there are blue-orange voters, basically. Like we see those also in Edmonton, and we see those in other places in Western Canada. But I don't know what do you make of it, Eric? I'm not too sure if there's something to take out of it.
Well, one of the things I guess I was thinking was about the power of brands. When we think about the Liberals in New Brunswick, we're still able to get nearly 50% of the vote. Suggests that the Liberal brand is not in and of itself a problem. If you have a good leader who is up against an unpopular leader running a bad campaign, that helps a lot. And then in Saskatchewan, the notion that the NDP brand was holding that party back. I think the evidence with these results, even though they lost, they're still going to end up with their best result since they formed a government. If the NDP gets 40%, if I would have told you a year and a half ago that the New Democrats in Saskatchewan were going to get 40% of the vote, you would have said, you're nuts. Not going to happen. No way. This party is doomed. Yeah. So it just kind of shows that people think that they need to fix these things. Kevin Falcon, when you don't need to. That the brands are not the issue. It's you need good leaders, you need good campaigns, and you need your opponents sometimes to do you a few favors. So I think that might be one of the lessons for me. And that also, for the Saskatchewan party, they won, and a win's a win. Yeah. They got distracted on that the gender identity issue in the middle of the campaign, talking about how change rooms was their number one priority. They did not win any seats in Regina. They nearly got swept out of Saskatoon. When you saw what happened in New Brunswick, again, Blaine Higgs and the PCs talked about that issue. Nearly swept out of St. John, Moncton, Fredericton. Yeah. I think that's why you hear Pierre Poilievre talking about dropping the GST on new home builds and not spending time on this issue whenever he can avoid it. Because I do not think that the elections we've seen show that it is necessarily much of a vote winner. It might energize a certain chunk of people's base, might help raise money. Maybe in some communities it has some resonance, but it is. I don't think it has proven itself to be sort of this trump card, this this issue that can really corner the other parties. Whether or not people agree with this stuff, I think that when you poll on it, you get people, thinking that they want to know what's up with their kids. Like, it's not like because they think that, I'm a good parent. I'm not going to cause any problems. I want to know what's going on with my child. But I think for when you talk about these kinds of issues, I think it highlights what you're not talking about. Because I don't think it's a priority for voters. Priority is healthcare, cost of living, affordability, housing. And everything else seems like you don't have your eye on the ball. So those are, I think, my lessons from probably these three campaigns altogether. Yeah, that's fair. It's just that the Sask party still got over 50% of the vote. I mean, I agree that they got derailed, but Saskatchewan, though, is its geography. It's going to deliver this kind of win.
What works in Saskatchewan won't necessarily work in other provinces or federally, but it worked in Saskatchewan. I mean, can we really disagree with that? They lost almost everything in Regina and Saskatoon, but their map says they didn't need it. Like, they have a majority. They're okay for 4 years.
Cities are growing. The rural areas are not growing.
Yeah, if you're premier, you don't care what happens in 10, 12 years because you won't be premier in a decade. So I understand what you mean, the long-term thinking, but governments don't think long-term. So, anyway.
one government will have a little bit of an opportunity to think longer term. We got the final results in British Columbia. Surrey-Guildford flipped, gives the NDP 47 seats. The Conservatives will end up with 44. The Greens have 2. There's going to be 2 judicial recounts. Those sometimes move some votes around, but it's very rare, especially when they're using electronic tabulators, that it'll overcome. Sometimes it'll be like they found that, there was a box that wasn't counted correctly, that kind of thing. But that seems unlikely. So we're going to get probably almost certainly 47 NDP, 44 Conservatives, 2 Greens. It's a majority, but
it's a majority.
It's a 1.6 popular vote victory for the New Democrats. Curious to see how this is going to work. I mean, the Greens are probably going to play ball for the most part, but the NDP names a speaker, then technically the Greens and the Conservatives could vote to the same number as the NDP caucus, goes to the speaker for tie break, someone gets a cold.
Yeah,
I don't think the Greens are going to force an election, but it does suggest that the next 4 years could be pretty white-knuckling it for David Eby and the New Democrats in British Columbia.
Gets a cold, gets stuck in traffic or on the ferry, and suddenly the legislature is missing 1 vote or 2. I don't think there's any way this lasts 4 years. It's too close. It's too unstable. But they did manage to win. They won 45% of the vote and 47 seats. This is a win. This is a short win, but this is a win. Now for the BC Conservatives, when you look at the numbers, they lost in most of the seats in Vancouver, and they could have done a bit better in the Metro Vancouver, but outside Vancouver. But they have a strong base to work with, and they will have some funds that they didn't have because of the results of the prior election. And so for 2028 or whenever the next BC election occurs, if the BC Conservatives play it right, they are the government in waiting. Now we'll have to see if they I don't want to say clean house because that's the wrong term, but if they become more serious, as you had said, I think 2 weeks ago in our discussion about this, they had nominated many of those candidates when the BC Conservatives was not taken seriously. It was not polling well. So maybe you didn't have the cream of the crop in there, but they have a chance to really prepare the stage for the next election. And as for the NDP, as you said, the win is a win. It doesn't make a big difference if they have this 47th, maybe, but considering everybody has to be there, everybody has to fall in line. You cannot have one single MLA who's disgruntled, says, you know what, I'm going to sit as an independent, or you lose your majority. This is not a stable legislature. But it'll be fun to follow, that's for sure.
I hope that they, with all due respect to the government there and the voters, I hope they don't last the 4 years, because 2028 is starting to look pretty crowded.
For
maybe
us,
a spring 2026, because 26 is starting to look like it's going to be pretty light. There'll be Quebec election, and if Ontario goes next year, that'll be it.
Yeah.
I don't like all this bunching of elections. It's bad for our work habits, our work-life balance. Now that we have the results in all 3 elections, we can now go back to our draft.
Yeah, the draft.
You know what? We did really good. We picked pretty darn well. Now, you did win. You got a BC NDP majority and a New Brunswick Liberal majority as your second and third picks, and I picked as my first pick a Saskatchewan party majority. So we actually got our top 3 picks turned out to be the top, the 3 results. So
that's right.
Good for us. But at least 2 of those picks turned out to be a lot more nail biters than maybe we thought. You got your NDP majority by a single seat.
Yeah.
And the Sask party majority looked a lot better even when we did the draft, which was like 2 or 3 weeks before the election. Then it ended up being a couple of days before. But Congratulations to you winning the election draft. Had we known Nova Scotia was going to go, we could have thrown that into there as a tiebreaker. Yeah. But, I guess there's no tiebreakers with 3. So anyway, congrats, Philippe. My cap's off to you. You won.
About the draft, though, this makes up for our La Salle et Mar Verdun draft, which was the last pick that won. But I would like to know, because also you said I had my BC NDP majority by 1 seat. I also had NDP minority in there as my backup, so I was okay. But
you recovered.
I yielded the first pick to you. Had I not done that, you told me that you wrote a list of your picks. Do you remember, had I picked first and chosen, of course, the Sask party majority in Saskatchewan, do you remember what you would have picked? Because I remember when I said the Liberal majority in New Brunswick, I re-listened to the episode. You said, "Oh, it was on my list, but it wasn't right away." Do you remember what you had on your list?
I will neither confirm nor deny what was on my list. I'm pretty sure I had 31 seats for the Liberals and a 1-seat victory for the NDP in British Columbia.
Oh, there you go.
So
Luck of the draw.
I would have also picked my. Yeah. I would have won. So it was just a coin flip. It was just the result of a coin flip. So congrats.
Oh, fine.
One more election around the corner. Nova Scotia on November 26th. Tim Houston going about 8 months early. They were going to have an election in July. That's when they decided it was a good idea. It's almost as if they're admitting that their July election date fixed law that Tim Houston and the PCs brought in 2021 or 2022 was probably not the best idea to have an election in the middle of the summer in the same year as the federal election. So anyway, this makes more sense to have an election in November than to have it in July. Do you think that Tim Houston is taking a win for granted here?
Well, maybe he is, but he could very well not be wrong, right? The polls have been overwhelmingly favorable to the Nova Scotia PCs for the past, since he took power, basically. The Angus Reid Institute report card for Mr. Houston showed good numbers. He was in the high 40s, if I remember well, last time. So if he has a disciplined campaign, this should be an easy win. It's just that the incumbency is really hard right now on many governments, as we saw in those three elections. Perhaps he's trying also to catch the opposition parties by surprise. Perhaps they are more ready than the Liberals and the NDP. There are many factors in here, but to go back to what you said about the fixed election laws, it was one of the first things that they implemented when the Nova Scotia PCs took power last time around. And right away they break it. Like right away. Just, let's pass a fixed election law. I think they were the last province to have a fixed election. They were, right? And at first occasion, they break it. It's just that I wonder now, does the law say it has to be in July, or does the law says every 4 years on a phase? I mean, so
I think it still says it has to be July.
Oh, God damn it. They have to change that. It's so, I mean, come on.
So it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, we will follow this one closely, I think, because it will be the only one left. So we'll have some time. What I fear is
Doug
that
Ford.
We won't, well... That's got to be Ontario's going to be in the spring, right? Or
it's got to be. But we'll see.
You got to get your checks first. You got to get your
that's right.
your Ford money. So
$4.
What I wonder is how many pollsters will be in the field in Nova Scotia, because it was a very little number last time around. But we'll see. I'll try to poke my pollster contacts to say, hey, almost 1 million people, biggest city in Atlantic Canada, Halifax. It would be interesting to have some clients there. So I'll do my best.
All right, let's get to the federal numbers finally. We thought that the provincial scene with 3 elections, now a fourth one, deserved our attention first. But it is still minority government here in Ottawa with the potential for a 5th election this year, always around the table. Unlikely, I think, before the end of the year, but can't take it off the possibilities. So we had 3 polls that were published over the last week. We should probably talk about the difference between them, because we got a poll from Abacus and a poll from the Angus Reid Institute. Both of them have a 21-point lead or 22-point lead, I should say, for the Conservatives over the Liberals. Almost identical numbers, 44 for the Conservatives, 43 for the Conservatives for the Abacus and Angus Reid polls, 22-21 for the Liberals, 18-20 for the NDP. And then we got the Nanos 4-week rolling tracker, has 39 for the Conservatives, 26 for the Liberals, 20 for the NDP. Who put 4% SUP? Was that me? That looks like a typo.
No, that wasn't me.
That was me.
That's funny.
That's pretty funny. 13. We have a shared document. It just, for some reason, I made a typo on that. 13-point lead for the Conservatives in the Nanos poll. So 2 different portraits right now. Not the first time we've seen this happen. Have you, first off, before we dive into some of these numbers, any reaction to those top lines?
Okay, so people do not overreact to the top lines. There's not much difference between those. Even though it looks like a big difference, statistically it is a small difference. So Abacus has the Liberals at 22, which is pretty stable for what Abacus has been showing for the past months. The Industry Institute, same thing, 21 Liberal, but also the Industry Institute has funny numbers in Quebec, and they've had funny numbers in Quebec for a long time with the Liberals in the teens. Nobody else sees that. And I look at in Nanos, you see Liberals at 26. Well, that seems high. Well, okay, but the previous Léger poll had the Liberals at 25. So we have a bracket here, somewhere between the low end is 21 and the high end is 25, 26. It's probably somewhere in the middle. So it looks like a big spread, but look at the BC polls, the final BC poll. It looked like a big spread until it fell somewhere right in the middle, and everybody, or almost everybody, was within within the margin of error. So this could be the case. Obviously, if we had an election, and those were the final numbers, and the Conservative, let's say, get 43%, then you would say, okay, yeah, Nanos is off. But it could be somewhere in the middle, so trust the average, that's what I would say. And again, the Nanos poll, we know fluctuates a lot. In 3 weeks, we could come back, and the Conservatives are back up in the low 40s.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned before, because it is that 4-week rolling poll, when there is a divergence between the Nanos number and some of the other polls, it stays for a while. It takes a couple weeks to get kind of filtered out. So it feels like there's a bigger divergence because we see it for a longer period of time, but it'll probably revert to the mean, and we'll probably see in the maybe another 2 weeks, the Conservatives have 41 in Nanos and the Liberals back down to 22 or 23. Because we should remember that the Nanos poll was the one that had the NDP ahead of the Liberals not too long ago.
Yep.
Even if it was by like 0.1 or whatever it was. But, so it goes back and forth. There was some interesting numbers within some of those polls. For the Angus Reid Institute poll, they polled on some leadership issues or whether there would be other people that could help the Liberal Party. I did find it interesting to see that there wasn't really anybody that did that much. So they asked if a leader would make you more likely or less likely to vote for the party. And if they focused on the Liberal universe of voters, so people who either currently support the Liberals or could imagine supporting the Liberals. I do find it interesting, and I'm not sure how much I put stock into it, but that Mark Carney was the only one who had a significant net benefit for the Liberal Party. Chrystia Freeland, Mélanie Joly, Marc Miller, Anita Anand, François-Philippe Champagne, and Dominique Leblanc, they either didn't help or they were negatives.
Yeah.
Marc Miller and Leblanc were the most negative. And then Christy Clark, former BC Premier, she was the worst option, was a net -9. So that means that there was 9 points more people who said they'd be less likely to vote for the Liberals than for the Liberals, more likely to vote for them. Sure, Carney, I still have lots of issues with the idea that a lot of people like Mark Carney, because I think he's not a likable guy. I think that nobody really knows who he is. Exactly. We've seen some polls that if you show his face, what was it? It was like 5 or 7% who knew who he was.
Yeah.
So, if I'm someone in the Liberal caucus, I'm really worried about my seat, and I see a poll like this, I'm like, got to get Mark Carney. That'll give me a better shot. Just pump the brakes a bit. You need to road test him a little bit, I think, before you can assume that. What do you think? Well,
I think what I took out from these numbers is the bad performance of Christy Clark, right? She is capable and I'm sure competent, but she has a baggage. And that baggage stays with you for a long time, right? Same way Jean Charest, when he tried for the federal Conservatives, even though he was pretty good in those debates, he hit a brick wall against Pierre Poilievre. But people here in Quebec and in the media, they said, well, remember the Charest years in Quebec, and they were varied, let's say. There were some ups and many downs. When you have a lot of baggage, it stays with you. Some of it is unfair, but it stays with you. That's why I look at these numbers. Chrystia Freeland, 0. In the total Liberal universe. Menegeli, 0. Mark Miller, -5. So current cabinet ministers that have this aura of the Trudeau era, any of them will be, I don't want to say tainted. It's not, maybe it's a bit strong as a word, but you know what I mean. Whereas Mark Carney is
interchangeable.
Outside.
They're the same. It's not. It doesn't mark a separation point between the Trudeau government and whatever a Freeland or Miller. Or, although I haven't heard Mark Miller as the leadership candidate really, but for voters, it wouldn't mark a changing point for the government.
This tells me that I think it's clear that the Liberals, once they lose the next federal election, if they do, but it looks like they will enter a period of rebuilding. And whoever leads the Liberals once they're back into contention status is not on that list. It will be somebody new. The same way that in 2008, nobody really took Justin Trudeau seriously. It was only years later when he had this leadership campaign that, this is a serious candidate that can take power. It's dark. It's rebuilding ahead for the Liberals for many years, I think. So.
And I also wanted to highlight, because we chatted about it a couple of weeks ago, the Abacus poll had a spike in Pierre Poilievre's negatives. They had jumped to 40%. It was the highest they had been in over a year or so. The latest update from Abacus had it going back down to 37, which is a little bit more on the higher end from where we've seen Pierre Poilievre's negatives.
Yeah.
So it could still mean that his baseline is higher than it used to be, or it could be that the 40% we saw a couple of weeks ago was the aberration. He's going to get back to his numbers. So I think it's worthwhile to point it out, since we talked about it last time.
Yeah.
That it's not clear that this is a building trend that's going against Pierre Poilievre.
Exactly. Net impression +4, 41 positive, 37 negative. It's okay. It's not great, but it's much better than his rivals.
And as we saw in those other elections in the provinces, sometimes you just got to be better than the other guy or the other gal. All right. You have a quiz for me this week.
Well, okay, a little small quiz. We took a break from the quizzes because, of course, these take time, and we were busy with elections, and also we changed the format of the podcast. But yes, so in honor of the election call in Nova Scotia, Eric, are you very well aware of your Nova Scotia map? Is that a strong suit for you?
I guess we'll find out. We'll
find out. It's a game we've played before. I added a little twist. It's very simple. I go back to the previous Nova Scotia election. That was in 2021. And I go in the map. I give you 3 neighboring ridings. There are 2 possibilities. 1, they were won by 3 different parties. You have to tell me which was won by which. Or there's a possibility that they were swept by one party, and you have to tell me which party swept those 3. Okay. There's 5 groups. Gold is 5 out of 5. Silver is 4. Bronze is 3. And shame is 2 and 1. Or 0. So, are you ready?
I am as ready as I'm going to be. Let's go.
Okay. We are going in the Halifax area. So, 2021 Nova Scotia election. I give you 3 ridings. Eastern Passage, Dartmouth South, and Cole Harbour, Dartmouth. Were these won by all the same parties? Or by same party? Or were these won by 3 different parties? And if so, which one which? I repeat, Eastern Passage, Dartmouth South, and Cole Harbour, Dartmouth. Do I pronounce that correctly? Dartmouth? Or is it Dartmouth?
Dartmouth, yeah. Dartmouth.
Dartmouth. Well, okay.
One of them had a by-election, didn't it? No. Preston was the one with the by-election. Oh, this is actually going to be tough. My map for Nova Scotia is not that good.
Well, it's going to improve this month.
Okay, well, I got to rule out whether it was a sweep or not. I actually don't know if it was a sweep or not. I think it might have been. The NDP, I think, won most of its seats, if not all of its seats, on the Halifax side, not on Dartmouth. But I don't think the PCs would have won Cole Harbour. So I'm going to guess, and I regret it already, Liberal sweep.
That's wrong, my friend.
Oh, no.
So the Liberals won Cole Harbour, Dartmouth. It's Lorelei Nicole. The NDP won Dartmouth South, Claudia
didn't they?
Chandler. And Eastern Passage was won by
PCs.
Barbara Adams of the PCs.
Oh, okay. Gold is out of the running. Okay, this is
Gold
going to
is
be
out
rough. This is going to be rough. This is going to be an embarrassing one.
You can still medal. Okay, number 2. Cape Breton Centre with Napier, Glace Bay Dominion, and Sydney Member 2. Was that won by all the same party? Were they won by all the same party or 3 different parties? And if so, which one?
I'm going to say they were won by 3 different parties. Okay, so it's say them again.
Yes, Cape Breton Centre with Napier, Glace Bay Dominion or Glace Bay Dominion,
Glace.
and Sydney Member 2.
I think. So I'm pretty sure Cape Breton Centre was NDP. I think that Sydney Member 2 would have been Liberal, and then I'll put Glace Bay or whatever as PC.
Glace Bay or whatever SPC, Glace Bay Dominion. And you are correct in all 3. Good for you,
thank
sir.
God.
It was Kendra Coombs or Combes in Cambridton Centre of the NDP. It was Derek Mumburquette in Sydney Member 2 of the Liberal. And it was John White in Glace Bay Dominion for the PCs. So you're 1 for 2.
I'm sweating.
All right, we're going back into the Halifax area. Number 3, Dartmouth North, Dartmouth East, and Preston. You mentioned Preston a moment ago.
Yeah. Okay, Preston I know went Liberal, and then it flipped in a by-election to the PCs. So did the Liberals win the other 2?
Dartmouth North and Dartmouth East.
Ah, darn it, I don't know. Did the NDP win? Okay, so if they won, you had already given them one of the Dartmouths, or the Cole Harbour Dartmouth, I think it was.
It was Dartmouth
They didn't win
South.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They didn't win enough seats, I think. So I don't think the NDP would have won any of them. I'm going to say all Liberal.
Preston was won by the Liberals. Angela
Okay.
Simmons, as you said, flipped on a by-election. Dartmouth East went to the PCs. And Dartmouth North went to the NDP.
Oh my God, this is awful.
We're going to learn a lot about Nova Scotia. It's okay, we haven't revisited Nova Scotia since a long time, but we will be great this month. So
It was
you're
a
1 for
tough
3.
election to have to follow last time.
really
because
was.
The federal writ had dropped by the time the Nova Scotia election happened.
It really was. So you're 1 for 3. You're still, bronze is still in play. Okay.
Shame is also still in play.
We are going. Where are we going? We are going north of Halifax. Number 4, Bedford Basin, or Basin, Bedford South, or Hammond Plains, Lucasville. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, I'm sure the NDP didn't win one of those. I'm sure of it, so it can't be. I think the PCs did well in Bedford. I'm going to say PC sweep.
It was a Liberal sweep.
Ah, no!
Liberals won all 3 of them. Kelly Reagan, Braden Clark, and Ben Jesome of the Liberals won all 3 of those ridings north of Halifax.
I don't like this game.
Okay, so you're going for the paper medal. Okay.
Participation badge.
Or wood medal was the 4th place. Okay, last one. Sorry, Eric.
No, it's fine. It's my fault. I should know my Nova Scotia map better.
Digby, Annapolis, Shelburne, and Queens. That's in the eastern tip, south of southern Nova Scotia, of course.
The western part.
Western, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, western.
I'm pretty sure Shelburne is very strong PC. And the NDP wouldn't have won any of those. So I'm going to say a PC sweep.
The PCs won in Digby, Annapolis with 50%. The PCs won in Queens with 70%. And the PCs won Shelburne with 63%. It is a PC sweep. You finished the quiz with 2 out of 5, but it was
a fail.
Yeah, it was a bit hard, I have to tell you. But we'll revisit Nova Scotia in the month of November because, of course, there's the election. But it was a tough one, so don't worry too much.
Okay, number of the week. Here, I want to go first. So my number is it's actually going to be a changing number. So by the time you listen to this, it might be inaccurate, but it's 1,793. This is the total number of votes separating the NDP from the Sask party in the 5 seats that would have won the NDP a majority government before the mail count. So that number is probably going to get smaller because those mail ballots are expected to go in favor of the Saskatchewan NDP. So it just kind of shows that, you know what? The right amount of votes in the right amount of places, the NDP could have still actually eked out this kind of victory. Less than 1,800 vote margin in those 5 seats combined standing between Carl Lebec and the Premier's office. So I think the election was actually closer than it looks, and I think that's a remarkable move in the province that had the most lopsided election results over the last decade.
I guess that's fair. My number was also regarding Saskatchewan. It was 40%. First, I mean, we think that on election night, the NDP had 39.5%. With the mail-ins, they should get to 40%. And that's a pretty good result historically for the Saskatchewan NDP, especially in this century, right? So that's my number. They did okay, but what you just said about the fewer than 2,000 votes separating the winner, I mean, had they flipped those and win the election but lose the popular vote by 10 points, I think you would have seen some Sask party going, oh, well, maybe we need this electoral reform. We should check that out. That seems interesting. Imagine if the Sask party had won more than 50% of the vote and lost the election, which I don't think it ever happened. We have to look that up. Has it ever happened that a party wins over 50% of the popular vote and loses the election? I can't imagine it has, but
it's got to be one of those like a 2-party race, maybe in the first part of the century or something like that. But yeah, that would have been something. That would have been something to see. So that'll be it for this week's episode of The Numbers. We are going to next record our mailbag episode, which is for our Patreon supporters only, and that's available at thenumberspod.ca. We got let me see the questions that we're going to look at. We got tons of one on sort of the meaning of the provincial elections and what they mean for the federal scene. We're going to take a look at how our Saskatchewan projection meeting did. And yes, we do have a few questions about the U.S. election, which is happening on Tuesday. So the next episode, we can talk about some of the fallout of that election, maybe. But if you want to listen to that, you can go to thenumberspod.ca and join our Patreon. You also get access to our Discord, and we get that once a month special episode. We don't know what we're going to do just yet.
Nope.
November. Maybe we should do a Nova Scotia projection meeting and I can get better at the map. So anyway, all right. Well, that'll be it for this episode, Philip, and looking forward to chatting to you next week.
All right. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you. Head to the mailbag for the questions.